A woman in a wheelchair was gang raped by 5 migrants. This went on for several hours, and when she was finally set free, the first thing she did was call the police. The suspects were called in for a hearing, but were shortly released out of custody. The investigation continues, but the prosecutor didn't think there was enough basis in the victim's accusation to keep them locked up. Despite the fact that she has documented injuries, his reasoning is that the woman's story isn't robust and that she didn't fight back enough. Yeah, of course she didn't. She's in a wheelchair. And they took that wheelchair away from her before they started raping her. And she clearly said no each and every time a new migrant went for her. What else could she have done? Eventually, she just gave up and focused on getting out of there alive, which is the typical reaction, even with non-handicapped women. Most victims freeze up due to fear. They don't try to escalate the situation with violence. And her defense lawyer had this to say to Nyheter Idag. Unfortunately, victims of crime will find themselves in a worse position if they didn't shout, scream, fight, scratch, or bite. And partly because of her handicap, she isn't physically strong enough and mobile enough to have been able to escape. My client also became paralyzed due to fear. The current legislation in Sweden doesn't take into consideration the science on rape. The law puts ridiculously high demands on women in order to have a case. Currently, there's an investigation about a new consent law which would add negligence to the legislation. And the woman's lawyer says that this type of law would have helped out a lot in order to keep the suspects detained and the prosecution as a whole. The migrants, however, claim that she wanted to have sex with complete strangers for hours on end in a bathroom, and the prosecutor apparently chooses to believe this. So it should come as no surprise that the people of Gotland became absolutely fucking furious. It should also be noted that Gotland is one of the worst counties in Sweden when it comes to clearing up rape cases. So on the 5th of October, about 100 people carried out a demonstration in order to show support for the woman and protest the decision to release the suspects. According to one of the people who organized the protest, the small island of Gotland is currently in shock and many people are crying. She says that many locals feel betrayed by the government and have had enough. The people on the island weren't consulted on whether or not they should accept migrants, and now some of the migrants they accepted are harassing women. They can stand in the middle of the road downtown and spit on the ground while looking at women. She also says that Gotland has changed, with an increase of rapes and sexual harassment that started during the summer. On the same day as the demonstration, in a separate incident before the demonstration, an activist from the National Socialist Nordic Resistance Movement went to the address where the woman was reportedly gang raped and confronted 3 immigrant males who have been pointed out as suspects. In a video clip posted on YouTube, they admit being at the police station. Eventually, the man lost his temper and started shouting.
Did you also have been with the police?
Yes, we...
Yes?
Yeah.
Yes, you are fucking scum, okay? Fucking scum is what you are.
Why?
Okay? Leave this fucking country, you filthy animals. You're not welcome here!
The same man in this video is now being suspected by police for outrageous conduct towards a public servant and trespassing. This is because the prosecutor in the case was visited at his house in the middle of the night. But you know, in order to be fair, before they start pressing charges, maybe someone should ask the prosecutor what he was wearing. And if he fought back enough. In addition to this, the investigator, police, and the suspects have also been threatened. So the suspects have received police protection and are currently not residing in Gotland anymore because of the threat against them. Which technically means they are free to go somewhere else in Sweden and rape again. Since then, the situation has supposedly escalated, and now special units have been sent in from Stockholm to keep the locals in check and help out with the investigation. They were also expecting a new demonstration to take place. So even with the lack of resources that the police has, they still managed to muster up 60 extra cops. The establishment are spending more resources keeping angry Swedes in check than they do locking away rape suspects from the rest of society. And yet, the establishment gets surprised at all this anger. the media of Gotland immediately started pumping out opinion pieces warning about racism. Local politicians are asking for reasonable citizens, and one of them makes sure to remind us that these type of crimes haven't increased at all lately, and the problem isn't culture, but destructive male norms. This guy started talking about porn, the police chief is talking about hatred, ignorance, and misconception. This guy seriously draws comparisons to Nazi Germany and says that's where we're heading. They actually published this shit. So apparently a demonstration against social injustice inevitably leads to death camps. And the Swedish public service media allowed the anti-racist organization Expo to label the demonstrators as Nazis, or at least ignorant people who are useful idiots to Nazis, and that it's highly possible these people reacted to something that they didn't have enough information about, and wrongfully interpreted as a form of injustice. So a gang of rapists being released immediately because the prosecutor didn't think that a handicapped woman fought back enough isn't a form of injustice? You don't think that gang rape qualifies as a form of injustice? These people are not Nazis. One of my followers attended a demonstration and said that it consisted of ordinary people. He told me that when he was on his way there with his friends, they were actually saying that they would turn around and walk away if they found out that it was a bunch of crazy white supremacists. But that wasn't the case. It was men, women, elderly, children, and even immigrants. You could see strollers in the crowd of people, for Christ's sake. He says that it was a quiet demonstration where we stood outside the prosecutor's headquarters and then went to the house where the rape took place. There we stood calmly and observed the house with grief in our hearts. And now we're being painted up as ignorant, hateful, violent racists by the media. Do you not get how this pisses people the fuck off? Ordinary people aren't even allowed to react to injustices without being suspected. When are you gonna realize that there is no innate conflict between opposing racism and wanting to decrease immigration? Just because you want social stability and a reasonably sized influx doesn't mean that you hate brown people on an individual basis. If anti-racism means taking in way more people than you can handle and not punishing people properly when they commit crimes, then you shouldn't be surprised if people eventually start thinking that racism is a good thing. People who are angry aren't even allowed to do a peaceful protest without the mass media labeling them as Nazis. And then you get surprised at the idea that concerned citizens could become radicalized. It's not smart to label angry and frustrated people as Nazis, especially not when they have valid reasons to be angry. Shallow labels don't change the reality. All that accomplishes in the long run is pushing angry people out of society. And where do you think they'll end up then? I think it's a good thing that people are finally speaking up against their officials. A demonstration is so much better than just sitting at home and being frustrated over the internet. All our politicians have done thus far is to spit in the faces of ordinary people, taking their hard-earned tax money and using it to fund policies that benefit anybody but the people themselves. Then they call the taxpayers intolerant racist for being concerned about the fact that hospitals don't have rooms for people who need surgery, and that bathhouses and music festivals have suddenly become unsafe places for women. But then we have the issue of certain citizens taking the law into their own hands. That's certainly not right, but is it really the biggest issue? Is it really the biggest issue that a prosecutor was threatened? People wouldn't even be doing this if the politicians had listened to their citizens. Why should Swedish citizens behave better than Swedish politicians? The fact that politicians aren't considered criminals is just a question of definition. Their actions are certainly immoral to the highest degree. But of course people shouldn't take the law into their own hands. I mean, just look at this. An asylum house got their window smashed because of the rape. This isn't even the same house as where the rape took place. These are innocent people who have nothing to do with the rapist. We're talking families who don't do any crime. They don't deserve to be punished for something they didn't do. And it is true that dumb, hateful racists are trying to capitalize on this issue and turn it into a debate about racial purity. Those people can go fuck themselves. Because all they're doing is making it harder on ordinary citizens who want to protest for the right reasons. During an interview with the leading figure of the protest movement, she said that the racists are a minority that the majority of protesters are just laughing at. Because it's so obvious that they just want media attention, and the majority of protesters are just ordinary people. Meanwhile, the mainstream media is doing everything they can to associate the demonstration to Nazis. She refuses to give interviews to them for this reason and only agrees to speak with alternative media outlets. And the same left-wing feminists who accuse Nazis of trying to capitalize on this rape are capitalizing on it themselves. The left is no better with their attempt to kidnap this issue and turn it into something else. Now the Feminist Party and the Left Party have organized a demonstration against racism. Talk about using other people's suffering to give yourself publicity. Why even do a thing like this when you could be supporting the victim instead? Why doesn't the Feminist Party just focus on the woman? I mean, look, they say, because of the recent events and the spiteful discussions that have been going on, we're arranging a manifestation against racism and sexism. You're seriously calling for a demonstration because people wrote dumb shit online when they were angry that someone got raped? You think that words are worse than rape? Rape is way worse than sweeping generalizations made by angry people on the internet. They also say, we want to show that we don't accept the oversimplified description of the desire to protect Swedish women from external threats. Simultaneously, we want to stand up and say that we don't accept violence towards women, regardless who it is. And this is a manifestation for the equal value of every human being. By doing a protest to assert the equal value of people, you're essentially spitting in the victim's face. You mean to tell me that a rapist and a rape victim have equal human value? The same fucking people who go on and on about the necessity of trigger warnings are completely oblivious to how shit like this could be upsetting for the victim. You took her trauma and you turn it into a political agenda, just like the Nazis. And then you tell us that you don't accept the desire to protect Swedish women from external threats. Well, why not? Because that's exactly what happened here. A woman was gang raped by men who the local population didn't want to take in to begin with. How is it feminist to import rape? And the majority of people protesting aren't even racist. Why do you think that this minority, this literal handful of Nazis, are more important than the victim? Your narrative is more important to you than the victim. Let's look at what the so-called racist protesters did. They held a peaceful protest and then they raised over 100,000 crowns in support of the rape victims. No headlines about that in the mainstream media, by the way. Now let's look at what the anti-racists did. They talked about racism, and then they talked about racism. And this isn't even the first time something like this has happened. There's been at least 2 other incidents just like this, where left-wing feminist groups arrange demonstrations against racism when someone's been raped by immigrants. If that isn't tasteless, I don't know what is. What kind of worldview do these people have? And you know, excuse me for assuming things here, but I'm kind of thinking that if one of these people actually had their own kid get their asshole beamed out by a gang of Arabs, they wouldn't exactly go, oh wow, that's horrible, but we need to demonstrate against racism right now. That's what's most important. Oh, forget your bleeding asshole. They got band-aids for that. That's gonna clean up right after, you know? But what's most important is that we make sure that people hate those guys for their actions and not their skin color. It's really important that people don't start getting, you know, suspicious of everyone that looks like them. So you know, just stop being a bitch. The problem is men, in general. All men are potential rapists. So we shouldn't focus on migrants, because not all migrants rape. But all white men are potential rapists. Actually, that's probably exactly what would happen. Those people are fucking crazy. Do you remember this guy? He felt sad that his rapist got deported. He describes himself as a feminist and anti-racist. 2 words that have become synonymous with brain dead. Then we have this one. Left-wing politician in Germany who got raped lied about her attacker's nationality because she didn't want to encourage racism. And in Sweden, a woman was raped on a train by a migrant she just met, and at first she didn't want to call the police because she felt sorry about this asylum seeker and didn't want to put him, and I quote, didn't want to put him in an uncomfortable position. You know what's most infuriating about these responses? The reason you report a rapist isn't just for your own justice. By pressing charges, you're also making life safer for other women as well, making sure that they won't have to become potential victims in the future. But these people have been so brainwashed by the Refugees Welcome campaign, they think it applies to your asshole as well. Swedes are more or less taught to be guilty about how good they have it compared to other countries. So of course we should share our resources with everybody else at any cost, no matter how they behave. So, just spread them. Spread those legs and let the Middle East come right in. Political correctness teaches women that they owe their vaginas to the third world. And just look at this case. She was raped by a black guy when she was passed out. Witnesses who saw the whole thing happen from their balcony called the cops and started filming it for evidence. But the woman refused to believe that the African could be capable of something like that, so she claimed it was a racist conspiracy. It was first when she understood that there was a recording of it all that she realized it was possible that she's wrong. But of course, this little detail wasn't even mentioned by the mainstream media. Only the alternative media found it worth noting. When women don't want to report being raped because an immigrant did it, that's a huge problem. And it shows that political correctness isn't just some harmless little neurotic stupidity. It's actively damaging people's lives. And that's why the media should address it. This idea that minorities should be protected at all costs isn't just the racism of low expectations. It's also directly harmful to women and society as a whole. And what really gets to me is the double standards and the hypocrisy. If a woman was gang raped by ethnic Swedes and people wrote a bunch of horrible shit about Swedish men online, the left-wingers and feminists wouldn't arrange a protest against sexism and racism. And we know that for a fact, because what they usually do when that happens is to relativize the misandry. So I suppose the underlying message here is that rape is only wrong when Swedish men do it. When it's about refugees, then we need to be careful and not make rash decisions. And this is coming from the very same people who defend statements like, all men are a social issue. Fuck you!